I think it was about assigning people to support you on the journey, so that buddy system. And you do have groups of leaders that can help you do that. So it was about ensuring new volunteers were being placed in the right areas as well, in the right groups. Every group is different, has different dynamics. So it was also being really conscious about that as well, that it was the right group and that it was offering you what you were wanting, as well as providing the skills that we were wanting.
That was Sally Breton, Head of Volunteer Delivery at St John Ambulance. At St John Ambulance, first aid isn't just a skill, it's a lifeline woven into the fabric of communities and workplaces across England. From first aid training to out-of-hospital patient care, St John Ambulance stands as a beacon of hope in critical moments. Sally Breton leads that charge in harnessing the power of volunteers to make a difference where it's needed most. With a diverse array of volunteering roles, ranging from youth education through to event first aid, St John Ambulance offers opportunities for individuals to contribute their skills and passions in meaningful ways. Join us as Sally shares insights into the dynamic world of volunteering at St John Ambulance, highlighting the transformative impact volunteers have on saving lives and building stronger, safer communities.
Hello, so I'm Sam Bennett. Welcome to the Engaged Volunteer podcast. Today I'm joined by Sally Breton. Hello, Sally.
Hello, hi.
Thank you so much for coming on. Really excited to have you here. So Sally is someone I spoke to probably for the first time, I think around about a year ago. You are someone who is very, very experienced in the volunteer leadership space. And you've got some really, I think, unique experience with some of the programs that you've managed and led. Some of it was planned, some of it was not planned by the sounds of things. So really looking forward to hearing from you today and just hearing a little bit more about how you ended up in the roles that you're doing and also some of the things that you find really important when managing your program. So welcome aboard the podcast.
Thank you. Real privilege to be here. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Sally. So just to kind of get us started, I guess it'd be really useful for the listeners just to kind of get a bit of a background as to yourself. So we were just talking off air just a second ago, just in some of your background, and you started with a really interesting kind of career path that wasn't really involved in volunteering at all, was it? So do you want to just start around where your career journey started and how we kind of ended up where we are?
Yeah, sure. So my younger days were very much involved around a focus of food. So I was really interested in cooking, and I had an excellent opportunity via where my mum worked as a housekeeper, and I was able to cook for some very famous, including royals.
Wow.
I did not know that at the time in terms of how important some of those people were that are currently in situ now, but I was able to just cook. And I cooked at weekends and supported a family during that time, very young, which led me to a career in catering. So that's what I did. And I took a catering qualification and then went on to do hotel management. And the reason I go back to some of the areas involved in, because it's all transferable. Those transferable skills have enabled me to keep abreast of things like HR, finances, budgets, etc. So I went into the hotel industry, helped open up a hotel in Southampton, and then went on to do a booking conference agency where I was leading large events and booking hotels for companies, and then I moved to Cornwall for personal reasons. And at that time, my mother had contracted multiple sclerosis. So she had been very ill and then became bedbound for a number of months. But we actually did leave. And in that time, I was bringing up a number of children, 2 children under 5, also managing my mother's care. So from a distance, because we did not have managers to deal with that care side of it. And she was very young. She was only 42 at the time. And it was a difficult time. It was a really difficult time. But that led me into my next career, which as the children grew up, going into schools, I had to find something that could help me with my children, but also give me something to go back into from a work perspective and have some of that time to be able to go and manage my mother's care. So during that time, I remember a time just looking into a magazine and seeing a challenge to do for the MS Society, and it was to walk the China Wall, so 300 miles of the China Wall.
Wow.
And it was obviously associated with my mum, and I wanted to do something, not just for everybody. And it was still early stages of people understanding what MS was at that time. This was, going back to 99. That sounds an awful long time ago. And I didn't tell you, I booked it. I didn't tell my husband at the time. I didn't tell anybody.
Wow.
And it really was a catalyst. I did it. I went over and it was quite cathartic. I don't know, going through bringing up children, losing your mum. You do lose people. People say there's different stages of grief. And I decided that in that time, part of my training was actually supporting my scout leaders that were looking after my children at their daily scout evenings. I would walk with them, in terms of training. And during
I was going to say, because 300 miles is a long, long way to walk.
It is a long way to walk.
How on earth did you fit that sort of training in around all of the other things you're doing around looking after your kids? And
well, interestingly, young people services are wanting support, and especially in scouting. And as a parent, you were sort of encouraged to go along and support. So, and being in Cornwall, the groups would walk, and so I tagged along onto their walks. And there was one particular one which is called the Coast to Coast, which children walk 32 miles from one coast to the other, sleep overnight. They do about 22 miles day one, and then the next day. And that's just happened this weekend, and I've just done the catering for that.
Wow.
So going back to that, I was sort of using those times to be with my children, train to achieve it. And when I came back from China, and it was 25 miles a day, a lot of time spent thinking about things and yourself. So I didn't have my children, I was literally with a group of people I hadn't met. At that time, what I'd also experienced was the scout leaders were wanting support. There was a lack of help. They were already short of leaders, which is obviously a continuing thing now. And I sort of had my arm twisted to help out. And so I joined. Now, during that time, it's not like it is now. I didn't have a very good positive volunteer journey. I didn't have a good experience joining. It was very much I had to sort of do it by myself. And I'm quite a determined person. So when I want to do something, I tend to try and achieve it. And coming from a customer service background, I was thinking, when you're wanting to get people to do something for free, how can it be so hard? So I was going back to my hotel life and knowing the customer service that you have to provide, and thinking, how can this be so different in terms of that journey? Sorry,
you said that you felt like your arm was twisted into helping out with this kind of scout program. Who was twisting the arm? Was it like a local leader
local leaders. And because I was energetic and wanting, and obviously doing this walk, and I talked about my catering as well, it was like, gosh, that this is somebody that could help out. So and that's what I did, and I've volunteered for that group for many, many years, and I've been in scouting now for over 15 years. But the reason that in terms of scouting that I just loved it was because I could spend time with my children as well. It was something, and I didn't actually lead in the same group. I led in the same group as my children, but not in the same sections. So until they were much older, and funnily enough, some of the children used to call me mum, but my children didn't call me mum. It was a fantastic, great time. But in that time as well, my mum passed away actually. And I decided to take some time out, and I left the school that I'd been working at. And again, during my work at the school, I specialise with SEND, so some real challenging situations with young people, but I was really determined to get young people to achieve things, and I always navigated them to Scouts as well. But in that, and I was talking about the volunteer journey, I set upon myself to apply for a role which enabled me to be able to part of that decision making and creation of a much better volunteer journey. And that's where everything started. And so the charity sector found me really at a time when I was wanting some direction, maybe some control. There's an element of that everything else in my life wasn't quite in my control. But I was able to work with a fantastic team of volunteers and staff members from the Scout Association to help develop that volunteer journey, also help develop a methodology to recruit young people. And from there, things just started to develop. And I started a volunteer management course, a coaching course, and ended up working for CRCC. So it's a charitable organisation in Cornwall where they support village halls, charity organisations, and in particular a few programmes that I helped deliver superfast BT-net into rural locations in Cornwall to help them access the internet, but also to make them more efficient and give them business management training so that they could utilise their village halls and buildings to a much better extent and bringing income into the local community. So that's where it all started for me there.
I like the kind of aspect of you coming from a customer service background and seeing that there's something that you could add value to there, and it gave you a bit of a purpose in that space as well, which also joined up with some of your wider passions and your kids as well. So a real coming together of passions there. Just interested, so when you first mentioned that you'd kind of started volunteering with Scouts, you weren't really impressed with that sort of volunteer journey and maybe felt like there wasn't enough support there. Could you just elaborate a bit more about what you mean there? And I know with volunteer programs, particularly those that support children, there's quite often training that is required. There's quite often forms that require completion, maybe references, interviews, background checks. It can be quite a cumbersome process for a volunteer to go through, and they are important vetting stages that have to be completed. So it is really important to make that as positive an experience as you can. So can you just elaborate on what that looked like back then?
I think, at that time, and we're talking, 15 years ago now, It was very much in terms of you felt you had to do it, yourself. And I'm all about independent learning and doing things independently, absolutely. But the processes in that were just not very easy to follow. And it was, who do I need to speak to? There was not much interaction in terms of if you're wanting somebody to volunteer, how are you engaging with them to make that experience positive? And that's not what I found personally for myself at that time. So that's where I brought in that customer service aspect into it and how do you engage people to ensure that they're engaged, to keep them warm, because you do have to go through those processes and wait, and sometimes it takes longer for some people than others. But also during that time, what do you do with them? Are they waiting at home? Are you engaging with them? Are you bringing them into a safe environment, but consciously understanding that they might not have had their DBS or etc. And for me, also meeting the right people. So volunteer organisations can sometimes be very insular, and so it doesn't seem as welcoming when you're somebody new coming in. It's great once you're in, but new coming in. So it was about opening up the doors and saying, actually, we're here, rather than people knocking on the door. And that was what was really important for me, was to open up the door and encourage more people in. And that's how I think organisations are much, much better at it now in terms of that. We talk about the volunteer journey, about the CX journey much more openly now, and how we need to make it much easier, but ensuring that it's also safe as well. So things did change, and it's all about just identifying those points and making that easier. And I know we went through different iterations of how that would look like. And it's I don't know if I've ever tried applying for Scouts now, but it's very smooth, it's very quick and very intuitive. And I think, digital technology has helped that, and it happens much quicker in terms of that. And the internet is obviously great, and the ways in which people recruit now and through a CRM, etc. That all helps now, that around that time 15 years ago. And for me, that's continued really in my thinking about how do we make it easy, but safe at the same time. And we are asking people to give up things freely. And again, the training, there's a lot of training. There were, I think, 20 modules I had to get through, and lots of babysitters and looking after my children. I did that.
You had 20 modules for the Scouts back then?
At the time,
wow.
Yes. Most of it was face-to-face and sort of assessments and things like that.
Wow, it's really quite intense.
Yeah, between an hour, sometimes it was a whole day, because you were learning how to scout. You were learning elements of being able to set up a weekend to look after a group of, young people. So it's really important that you got that depth of education, and from some very experienced leaders, that have been in the organisation for a very, very long time. And I absolutely loved it. Saw it as a really great place to learn new skills, develop, where sometimes some children don't find that avenue in a school, whereas they found that outside in terms of scouting. And it's not the only place. There's St John ambulance, air cadets, the army cadets. My son went to the army cadets as well, and it's just a place where there's such opportunity to be able to do things.
Absolutely. So you get exposure to kind of a wider network, more experiences, more stories to tell on your CV and your UCAS applications for universities and schools.
Absolutely.
And those sorts of things. Absolutely. Big advocate for that. Just intrigued on the volunteer side. So you mentioned just trying to open up the door to, I guess, a wider pool of people and being a little bit less insular. Do you want to talk about how that was kind of encouraged? Because one of the big focuses that we're seeing at the moment in the marketplace, and if you hear me speak at webinars and events, one of the big things I'm speaking about right now is how do we position volunteering opportunities to different audiences? So rather than just putting a bunch of roles out there and seeing who bites, actually we're putting roles out there specific to people coming out of college and university and those sorts of demographics, which might have a slightly different message and different what's in it for me versus than different demographics that maybe are in retirees and so on. So just intrigued as to what kind of demographics that were involved at that time and some of the ideas that you had around trying to open that up a bit more.
Yeah, I heard somebody say recently that we always talk about areas or demographics that are hard to reach, but they say that actually a lot of charities are difficult to find. So there's the big names, but it's actually, locally, how easy is it? And sometimes I've heard stories of I emailed, I rang, I didn't get anything back,
Absolutely. And I think especially when you've got volunteers who are helping young people, because as I say that you touched on it, those screening steps are very important. And quite often in that screening process, you could be waiting for a background check to come back, or there is a reference that has to be done and you've got to wait 2 weeks for that person to fill in their referee form and respond. And it's quite difficult, I think, for the charity to then connect with that person throughout the process whilst there's nothing happening necessarily. So that's certainly a big challenge.
It is, and lots of different organisations doing it differently and according to how that particular role is as well. So, and we've gone through different iterations at St John too. So after the pandemic and COVID, we actually changed to inviting volunteers to join and sort of, what's the phrase, try before you do. That's, and see what would interest you before you commit to something, which is, and that can be difficult as well, because there's a tendency that time frame can be too long or it can be too short, and then you're putting, pressure. But sometimes that's also good to set the expectation of what is required. And the expectation at St John is quite different because of the level of training and professionalism that I would say in terms of what is required to go and volunteer in some of our clinical roles. Going back to that, in terms of how that engagement through recruitment, and particularly at Scouts, I think it was about assigning people to support you on the journey, so that buddy system. And you do have groups of leaders that can help you do that. So it was about ensuring new volunteers were being placed in the right areas as well, and the right groups. Every group is different, has different dynamics. So it was also being really conscious about that as well, that it was the right group and that it was offering you what you were wanting, as well as providing the skills that we were wanting.
Just out of interest, how would you assess that, Sally? If you're placing someone into a group, what would you be using would it be forms that they fill in when they sign up to say what areas they're interested in, or would it be through an interview process? How's that typically done? So
it was an interview process at the time, so we're going back some time, but also visiting different groups and getting a feel for them, supporting them and going around and offering that opportunity to be able to do that. And that was much easier in Cornwall from a Scout perspective, because we have lots of groups. So, you could probably choose between 2 or 3 different groups in some areas. But so it was very much a feeling, a meeting people and who you connected with to be able to do that. So at that time, yes, it was, and we are going back a few years, but I know things have changed, that it's much quicker now and people get into groups, and you only have to go online now and it pops up and which area you want to be in, and people contact you really quickly. So that process is really fast now.
It feels like there's been a shift there where back then you might have been speaking to an individual and then saying, oh, why don't you go and try these 2 or 3 groups? Whereas now it feels a lot more self-service, and the volunteers are actually coming in and almost selecting their group before they've even actually met with them or spoken to them at all. Is that a shift that you think you've seen?
I think so, yeah. And I think we're just better at it. I think we're just better at then communicating with people and getting people involved, because we've seen the value over the years. And just seeing this weekend, there's parents that come along to help. So natural recruitment process happening all the time. And that was a methodology that was really encouraged, to speak with your parents. They are the network behind every child, aunties, uncles, teachers, etc., to get people involved. And people do say, I'm always recruiting. If I'm on a train, I'm talking about things, I'm getting people involved, and some people are better than others, and some people like doing it. So it's about identifying those people that can do that. And I talk about that a lot at St John, in terms of who are your salespeople, who are your people that can really engage and talk to people, enjoy doing that, to get them involved, to take those roles.
And typically, it's interesting you use the word salespeople there. So is that a phrase that you actually would use at St John Ambulance?
I use it. Yeah, I
Cool.
use it because you have to be passionate about what you're talking about and understand the organisation from a sort of holistic perspective, rather than your own reasons for volunteering sometimes. So it's about the benefits that it will give that person if they join, what they can get out of it, what we're asking, and the expectation of that to do. So I personally use that. I think that to get people involved in something that you're passionate about, it's like somebody selling, in a restaurant. I don't, you say, well, what do you recommend? They say, well, I actually like X, Y, and Z, and you buy it. It's about,
for someone with that relatable experience that's maybe kind of sharing their advice on things that you think other people that are similar to you might be interested in and benefit from. With St John, when you say those salespeople, who typically would be your kind of, I guess it could be a mix of everyone, right? Could be parents, could be volunteer coordinators, managers, a mix of paid staff and volunteers that come along, group leaders. Is it just a mix of everyone that you're looking to just try and basically share their experience with? Or
yeah, I think it's everybody. And you just talked about the London Marathon, and in terms of, we helped a lot of people at the weekend, and in particular the news story that came on this morning, on BBC Breakfast. And
that's right, incredible. I mean, just for the listeners, so the London Marathon event happened 3 days before we're recording this, and I woke up this morning to BBC News, and there were three youth cadets from St John Ambulance who were on BBC News just telling their story. And essentially, as I understand it, the CEO of one of the large supermarket chains in the UK was actually running the London Marathon, had heat stroke, I believe collapsed during the run, and essentially his life was saved by 3 young paramedics who'd been trained through the St John youth program to administer that first aid, and essentially was life-saving treatment that they'd given. So incredible.
And every single St John person that is out and in uniform is selling the brand, is saying who we are and what we do. And I think we do more than what we do in terms of events that we're at the football, we're at local events, and in particular now we're really focused on community education. And you talked about how we need to ensure that people have confidence in administering first aid, just locally in your community. And that's a really important direction in which we were going, is to ensure that more people are first aid confident, and that they're able to support your fellow colleague, your community in their time of need, And so in terms of every single volunteer, every single member of staff, we are the ambassadors for the organisation. So encouraging people to understand what our mission is, in order, and what we want to do in order to support beneficiaries, and that can be our young people, volunteers, and our patients. At the end of it is really, really important.
Talk me through how, because you obviously were supporting the Scout Association with their kind of community development program, and you've ended up then progressing through, and for the last sort of 6 or 7 years have been essentially head of volunteering for St John Ambulance. That's quite a big transition. You've gone from looking after some of the networking groups that maybe your kids were a part of, to leading a volunteer strategy for, I imagine, tens of thousands of different types of volunteer for one of what I see as one of the biggest charities in the UK. So talk me through how that kind of happened and how you ended up in that role.
Yeah, so when I was talking about Scouts, then I was volunteering for them, and then I worked for the community charity in Cornwall, and then I applied for a job through Scouts, and I was supporting a program of a recruitment methodology to recruit parents to enable groups to open up. So did that in Cornwall initially, got a job through Scouts, and then worked across the whole of the south of England, opening up new Scout groups. So I worked with the Scouts to do that, and a really successful program, and working with lots of funders to open up new groups in some hard to reach areas and just where there's a waiting list, and absolutely loved it, and it was such a privilege to work there, to do what I loved and get paid for it. It was just like, this is very strange. This is, and I used
What was it you loved most about that? Because you've obviously come from a very different background. That was a big role change essentially. So what was it that really?
It was going into assemblies and talking to young people about Scouts, and taking my tent and all these things, and talking about an open day that we were going to do, and then having hundreds of children turn up with their parents. And for me, it was about engaging with those parents. It wasn't the children, because you've got the children hooked with all the activities, hosting marshmallows, doing all those sorts of things. But it was about talking to like-minded parents and engaging with them to say, this is a perfect opportunity for you to spend time with your children, as well as offering your skills and your time to be able to help lead a group and enable other children to start scouting, because we had such large waiting lists, which we still do. And then going through that process, it was literally a hand-holding process for actually 12 weeks, meeting with parents, showing them what they could do, learning about Scouts, all the, the regulations and what we had to do, the risk assessments, everything that enables you to open up a group and run a successful, safe group. And it was just amazing meeting different people, and actually the time people were going to give, and saw the value in what they were providing, not for just their own children but other children, but also enjoying it themselves. And I remember with one new group, and the parents came to pick up the children, after a long weekend. We'd done loads of activities, walking, archery, cooking, everything you could think of.
Amazing.
And the mum turned up and they said, "Oh, you look really tired. Or the children must have kept you up." And I was like, it wasn't the children. We were playing cards. And that's the benefit, is that it's not just young people that are getting the benefit of having a good time. You're engaging, you're meeting new people and having fun yourself. I think that was what was great about it. And
definitely. And you'd moved to the area fairly recently as well, right? So I imagine to build a bit of a network in that area that you've moved
to. Absolutely. And I've created, I've got lots of amazing friends that have come from that, which I'd never have met had I not gone into that. So I worked for the Scout Association for nearly sort of 4.5 years. And there comes a time when, and I'd been promoted, and I knew that I couldn't get any further. And at a time my children were growing up, and I saw an opportunity at St John Ambulance to run a funded program for the over 50s, actually, in terms of a community advocate program. And that program was about teaching first aid in communities, and communities that did not reflect the communities that we were already in across the country. It was funded by Nesta, and it was about building a network of community advocates to teach them first aid, and for them to go into the community and teach 3 ways to save a life.
Kind of training the trainer there. You're teaching them to
and so that they can support their community. So we would go into some ethnic communities that were not always open to learning about first aid, or there was a need for them to do that, and opening up programs to be universal in terms of different languages, and encourage more people to learn about first aid, and created a sort of St John friend, where if you learnt about first aid, then you became a friend of St John. So it was quite a small program at the time, which lasted about a year. But we managed to get about 300 plus community advocates across the country, all going out into their communities to enhance people's knowledge of first aid, which has continued sort of in the background throughout. I've been doing that programme for 12 months, and then the opportunity of head of volunteering role for London and the South region came up, and took that opportunity, and so looked after over 6,000 volunteers across the south of England and London, and that was very much an opportunity of seeing St John at its best in terms of the delivery of, I've been at London Marathon, big events, and seeing our volunteers do what they do best. And it was, yes, an amazing experience. And we were at a stage of really developing some of our, other programs. Hospital volunteering had come in, so we were really trying to support how we help the NHS.
Yep.
In terms of triage and A&E, developing our ambulance service, and our paramedics recruitment was a really big thing. So we were training in London, we were training over sort of 300 people every quarter at that time.
Yeah, wow.
So really...
It's a big change, isn't it, Sally? It's a big step up in terms of scale from the first role that you were doing at St John's to the second one. Absolutely. And also, I would imagine that second sort of head of volunteering role, there's probably quite a mix of different volunteering roles that you're supporting, right? It sounded like that community trainer model was kind of a fairly standardized role across the country, but this is now throwing yourself into managing all kinds of different maybe volunteering activities that they might be being recruited for.
Yeah, it was huge because it was literally from a support person through to a clinical volunteer, and dealing with clinicians, with, healthcare professionals. That's, really high level in terms of, and also our support volunteers that have been there for a very long time. So understanding the heritage, the history in terms of how certain things, work. And it's a very, very different role in terms of delivery as well, and operational delivery and ensuring standards. And I think there it was where I could really see what I call the professionalism of volunteering. And the high standards in which our volunteers are trained. We have a very high standard of training at St John. So it was an amazing opportunity, and one that sort of lasted, nearly a year, and then COVID hit.
Yeah. So St John Ambulance to me are probably the most well-known sort of logo that you see, and you touched on it. There's a brand associated with St John Ambulance. When you go to a big event in around London or parts of the UK, you will see St John Ambulance volunteers, paramedics, ambulances on site at all kinds of different events as well, real mix. And then obviously COVID happens, and you are in a head of volunteering capacity at one of the most well-known kind of public-facing healthcare organisations to support the public at a time when we're all locked down, and is kind of a national emergency and response unit that's required. So, yeah, one of the main reasons I kind of wanted to reach out to you originally is I remember you just all of a sudden getting thrown into this unexpected role where we've gone into lockdown, and all of a sudden there's a big task force that's being assembled. What was it like at that time? What kind of asks were being asked of you to put together? What was the challenges that you were facing?
Yeah, so obviously the first 6 months of COVID, we were in that lockdown stage, and there was no discussion, or really in the background there were discussions around vaccination and what was that happening, but that wasn't at the forefront of that first sort of 6 months. And I had 3 other colleagues across the area, across the country, so literally lockdown went into place, but we went into operational command mode. So it was very much around supporting the NHS from the ambulance perspective, and also in hospitals. So that's where we needed to change some of our ways in which we onboarded our volunteers in a very quick way. And at that time, obviously, the airlines had stopped, and we had a recruitment process for airline volunteers to come on board because they would have had a basic knowledge of first aid. So we very quickly went into a recruitment mode to support airline volunteers and people that wanted to support the organisation in that first 6 months of COVID. Now, we didn't think it was going to go beyond that, did we? None of us could imagine. It was a difficult time because we had a lot of volunteers that didn't want to be involved at that time because it was a scary time.
Yep. With the airlines, just out of interest, were they people that had mostly been put on to because we had quite a good furlough scheme in the UK for some time? Were they mostly staff that had been placed onto furlough, or were they people that had been potentially just made redundant?
A little bit of both. And they were wanting just to give something back, and like lots of people, they were wanting to do something at a time when everything was locked down. It was a very
How did you go about
time.
finding them out of interest? Because you've obviously got these massive airlines with thousands of employees, and you're in a place where you need to recruit at very quick, short notice, virtually as well, I imagine. A lot of this is going to have to have been done online. A whole pool of kind of first aid trained people. How did you go about kind of approaching them, finding their details or advertising in the right places? Because that sounds like a challenge.
Yeah, so we had some connections in terms of people knowing different people. I think they also reached out to us and conversations just started. But in the background, we had to develop a very quick onboarding process to be able to get people through. And because there was a level of training that they'd had and first aid, we were able to do a short version of that. And then with our hospitals, we had some very good induction training programs. So we had our volunteers supporting new people going in to support in terms of just triaging and being there for people at a really difficult time. People didn't want to go to hospital either, but those people that did needed a kind face, needed somebody to hold their hand while they were going through this difficult time. And equally ambulance crews as well, they were really under pressure during that time to support. And from our own volunteering perspective, our own volunteers wanted to do something, but they had to do it virtually, which was a very new thing for our volunteers who meet every week. And now all of a sudden everything had to be done via Teams, and it literally was overnight, wasn't it, in terms of and so us talking like this now is just normal now.
Normal now, didn't exist, did it?
Yeah. And it was successful. There was learnings, as there always is. There's different things that you can do better, but we had already had quite a good online sort of virtual training program anyway. So it was about adapting that. And then it was supporting our volunteers to be able to line manage, to be able to support people online, which was very different to before. And that was really successful at that time. And again, we didn't realise it would last so long. So in the September, it was sort of conversation started, and I was asked to attend a day at Chesterfield. And it was literally a discussion around, okay, this is happening. We're going to be working with, NHS England. And what was amazing about it was actually coming together with different people from a company, an organisation that you'd been with, but not necessarily met. So finance, IT, logistic, every single avenue of the organisation came together in order to build a programme to deliver that was going to recruit 26,000 volunteers.
In how long a time? What was the goal there? And where did that number come from out of interest? Do you know where that came from, 26,000? Was that just what?
So it was based on the number of people that needed vaccinated across the country in terms of the NHS trusts, and what we felt was the number needed to deliver in terms of number of people that needed to be vaccinated. And some areas did it faster than the others, so we were never going to know quite what but that was the number that we needed to try and volunteer. And at the time, I was like, wow.
I'm just thinking in my head, if someone dropped that on me, I'm just thinking, were you kind of advised on how to do it, but also 26,000 volunteers is the big picture number? Did you have a breakdown of, well, we need 5,000 in London and we need 3,000 in Birmingham? Was it kind of broken down by location like that?
It wasn't at that time. That sort of came a little bit later, because different areas work at different, in terms of different speeds, and the need was different in terms of that. And everybody pulled together to set up a new recruitment system. I was part of that team. Create a digital system.
It sounds like almost the entire focus and goal and initiative of the organisation, the charity, completely shifted. It sounded like it all kind of centred around this one project that didn't even exist 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So huge amounts of change in very little time.
Huge amounts of change at a time when people would also be made redundant and furloughed. And that was the difficult thing. And also our volunteers not able to do what they wanted to do at the same time. And to get our volunteers to support in this as well, and to be, we needed to have over 300 sort of line managers to help support all the vaccination volunteers coming in, working very closely with other organisations as well. also talking to companies that, people were
And some spare
furloughed
staff.
off,
Yep.
to engage with them from a corporate social responsibility perspective,
Yep.
in terms of that. So lots of different perspectives in how we were going to deliver this. But ultimately, there was also, how are we going to work together, all online, and we were needing people to interview. We had to recruit over 300 people to interview people. And, everybody came together, and we had some brilliant support from, the IT teams to be able to enable this, because we had to completely shift how we did things. And so people were all on their own systems, going through some very quick induction sessions.
These were like briefing sessions with the likes of yourself or some of your team.
Yeah, and us teaching them how to use the new system. It was a new system for everybody, and ensuring, because it was all online, that we were also engaging with them. So not only the core staff teams who were interviewing, but we also had hundreds of volunteers interviewing people as well. And literally 12 hours, as well as monitoring email addresses. Our customer services were taking phone calls, and we had over 87,000 applications.
Amazing.
That was over the 6 months.
You kind of put that out online and say, hey, we're looking for volunteers that have first aid experience, get in touch. Or where did those 80,000 people find you?
Yes, we worked closely with the RVS in order to support from one of their programs. And obviously we were on TV, and yes, just our general messaging on social media and things. So, and we were getting probably something in the region of 8,000 emails a week in terms of answering questions, and people were wanting to do something. That was what was quite amazing. And we were having to say no to people as well, which was really hard, because at that time we were getting some idea of numbers across regions and getting a lot more people in one area than others, and we had to say no to some people. That was really unfortunate. But we did recruit up to 26,000 people.
Incredible.
I think it was by that sort of March, April of that time. And behind the scenes of all that, obviously all those people that were being recruited were also being trained. So they were going physically to training centres. So we had a whole team of trainers that adapted a training programme of vaccination to be able to vaccinate people. And we did 3 different roles, actually. So one was more of a carer role, where we could get 16 plus volunteers to be able to support. So they were there engaging with people coming in for their vaccination, supporting them, holding their hand after their vaccination, ensuring that they were okay, making them teas and coffees if needed to be. But people weren't really sitting around after that. But it was there. We were trying to create an opportunity so that people could be part of this if they could not vaccinate. And there were some quite different levels in which we were asking people to be skilled. So so we were wanting that opportunity to give everybody a chance that wanted to volunteer at that time.
Amazing. What a huge effort, and a huge logistical challenge as well to manage all of that, because I think it was a time when, as you said, there was a lot of people on furlough. They had probably more free time than they normally would. No one had any events or social plans necessarily that were kind of committed in stone. So I think that you got a lot of people there that are willing to help, which is amazing, but equally then trying to coordinate all of that. And with the St. John brand, you've got a kind of a level of service to uphold and maintain. I can imagine there's so many challenges with it. What do you think was the biggest challenge that you faced?
Biggest challenge was actually not being able to give an opportunity to everybody. So we did have a large number of people that were trained but didn't get an opportunity to volunteer. And I think that was probably the hardest thing, because people were upset, people wanting to be part of something I hope never happens again. But and I think that was really hard. But the positive side of that was that the country went into action so quickly and delivered vaccination at a much quicker pace than what we had envisaged. And we were getting doctors and nurses volunteer. Even though they were out on the front line, they were wanting to be part of the vaccination program as well. So that was the most difficult part, but we did things really quickly to enable that to happen. So that it's sort of bittersweet, really, in terms of that. At no point do I ever want to be talking to people, especially people that are offering to volunteer, that they are upset because they can't do something that they've trained for. because we don't have that opportunity anymore. And we wanted to try and open up different things to be able to do that. So the hospital volunteering, we did offer different avenues which you could then do if you didn't get to, help vaccinate. So, it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? That I think that was the hardest thing to do, dealing with some very upset people that wanted to just do good, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely, but it's still kudos to them for wanting to be a part of it. And I think if they've been able to get through some of your processes and some of the training, I think they've probably still been able to come away with some skills out of it that they probably didn't have going into the process. So I think by the sounds of things, those briefing sessions and so on are certainly enabling people. And the more people that know first aid or know how to respond in those sorts of situations, the better.
And some of those people, because they had been trained as we were coming out of, and obviously then what happened was, the repeat dosages, and things. So that did keep a lot of our volunteers and enable some of those volunteers to then do something towards the end. And as we were coming out of COVID, retraining them to deliver flu vaccines as well. So,
oh, really? So that's still going.
So there was that element there to be able to do that. So there was sort of some light at the end of the tunnel. I think for us as an organisation, what we were wanting and hoping to do was to keep a large majority of them as we went, coming out of COVID. Yep. And that was more difficult because the call to action was not the same.
Yes.
And people were returning back to work and life was different.
Yep.
Even for some of our volunteers who had time off, it was like, actually, I want to do something different, or I've reevaluated. So the next part of our journey was about engaging with volunteers that had not been engaged over vaccination, not because of not wanting to engage, but because they were had to have time off, and we weren't operating in the way that we had done before.
Yeah. And you ultimately you had to kind of drop everything and focus on a whole different set of priorities in a short space of time. So there's inevitably going to be some of the normal business as usual that kind of tails off to some degree. How has that been since? So obviously we're 3 years down the line, or maybe even 4 years down the line now from that huge number of applicants coming in. Have you seen, a decent chunk of them kind of stick around in that volunteering space? Obviously, they had some training from St. John, and I know the world's very different kind of now, and they've probably gone back to work. But have you seen some of those been able to progress through to other opportunities?
We've kept some people, not, obviously not 26,000, but that would be amazing. But we have kept some people. Some people have changed career. Some people have gone on to other things. And we did devise sort of a program to keep some of them. But I think COVID just dragged on, didn't it? And then as things changed, people were returning, and we couldn't offer that flexibility of volunteering going into the future. And for all charitable organisations, things have changed since COVID. There is a different ask. Things people are asking for more sort of micro volunteering opportunities. The time is different. People are reevaluated. We don't actually have a problem with people coming to St. John and wanting to join us. We're not recruiting at the moment, because we're doing our own sort of restructure and things in terms of what we want to do, and reevaluate our recruitment process as well. But we're still accepting applications, and things have changed. And it's about how do we offer something that is simpler to want to join. And that's quite difficult when you think about an organisation that is, and what I would call professional volunteering, and the requirements and expectations that are to deliver clinical first aid, So there's that area. But also what we are striving to and driving is that community first aid education, and empowering local communities to be first aid confident and share that knowledge, amongst your communities, and trying to bring in that resilience within a community to be able to help themselves before needing any further help, should that be in the NHS, in terms of that. So, and as we've seen, we are saving lives at different events and ensuring that people are safe at the most vulnerable time of their lives.
Yeah, and just quickly on that, so you obviously had that original role that you were doing at St. John, which is kind of that train the trainer, getting people in the community and spreading the message. It sounds like that program has maybe continued to grow. And then also at St. John, you've got quite a unique setup with your youth centres as well, where I believe you've got something like 500 youth centres across the UK, where and they're oversubscribed, right? You've got more children and parents wanting their kids to be part of that scheme than there are spaces on that scheme, which is incredible. And ultimately, I guess the idea could be there that for your community engagement, you've got these children who are growing their confidence, they're coming to these youth centres, they're getting their skills around first aid training. I'm assuming the idea is that actually many of those could grow up and either follow a career, profession in healthcare, or at some capacity being able to volunteer as part of that community scheme at a later point in their life as well. So can you just quickly talk around the status of that scheme at the moment, and also if there is that progression path there from the youth centres?
Yeah, so our youth units are wanting to grow. The lack of leaders is the issue. So we're openly recruiting for youth leaders, and we've made that recruitment much simpler.
What would you be looking for in a youth centre leader candidate?
So somebody that wants to work with young people, obviously, somebody that would want to utilise some leadership skills, the opportunities with St John in terms of those leadership skills and working with others, finding out about the organisation, finding out about first aid. The opportunities within that area are also big in terms of what you can do, but the focus is obviously on leading those young people and developing the programme in which we offer, which is the Grand Prize programme that we call, and again covering different areas of skills and learning first aid and developing those young people to be able to get trained and deliver first aid at these events, and they are our future leaders as well, as we want to replenish and keep the organisation going in terms of adult leaders and continuing, the St John legacy. So there's obviously a training programme, there's that you do some youth leader training, need your DBS, learn first aid, obviously, and commit to being able to provide that leadership to young people on a weekly basis, and we are trying to be more flexible in how we deliver that, but it's really important for young people to be face to face and engage in that activity. So
consistent point of contact as well for these young people. They need that kind of familiar face to help them and engage with them over time. Is that all centered around sort of school holiday periods? Is it sort of 6-week kind of commitment schedules during terms, or
a lot of them are according to the school calendar. Some choose to meet during the holidays, some go to camps, and we do that as well. So it's mainly based around about the school calendar in terms of that, but as you said, we have large waiting lists, so the more leaders that we have, the more places that we can open.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, as I say, it just feels like a really unique program, and to have such an oversubscribed number, I think one of the biggest kind of challenges that I was originally told with St John Youth Centres is that management of the wait list and the prioritisation of it, which is an incredible problem to have, and actually quite a rare problem for a charity to have so many people that want to get involved in the scheme is really, really credit to the brand, and credit, I think, to all of the work as well that you and the rest of the team at St John have been doing over the last few years with the community, because I think it's something that people really resonate with St John. They see you at the events, they see the impact that you're having, and they want their kids and themselves to be a part of it and develop in that same way.
And I think one of the things I didn't touch on, because it sort of goes down a different route, but it's, we have volunteer paramedics that we train, which, costs over sort of £1,500 to train somebody.
Wow.
As well as they go out and volunteer as a volunteer paramedic, they're driving the ambulances, they're doing that. And imagine if the NHS had to pay for all of that as well. Individuals, you have those three, there's a technician, there's two people, blue light training, that doesn't even include blue light training. So that professional volunteer, that is somebody who is not a paramedic in their daytime.
Yeah, and I really like that phrase, professional volunteering. So you have enabled that to be, it is someone who's doing professional work, but they've not maybe found it through a professional route. You've actually just enabled that to happen. And as you say, one of the things that really gets missed in the industry in general, I think, with volunteering, I think there's always a perception of volunteering that it's something that's quite soft, good for the soul. It's quite sort of, just nice for building community. But actually, it's a lot more than that, and there's so much sort of GDP value and financial value in the volunteering space. If you stripped it away, as you said, the NHS, the healthcare system is really struggling as it is, and if you took away all of that support that the likes of St John are giving, it would leave a huge gap, wouldn't it?
And the problem is that it's really expensive, and it's really hard to fundraise for that. People don't see the connection to them unless they've been the one to be saved, you know, or
Yeah, it's
so.
interesting.
So being able to manage that, because it is more expensive, because actually you still have to pay volunteers their expenses in terms,
Yeah.
and it can sometimes be more expensive than paying somebody because of sometimes travel and accommodation and all those sorts of things. And also you can't make people do stuff. You can't
No.
make a volunteer that's been trained. They have to do so many hours, but you can't then make them do something. So they can just call up sick, you know.
Yeah. So when you were just talking there, you were saying about people that kind of get tied into the volunteering space or to the fundraising space having lived experience. So someone that's maybe been treated by St John Ambulance is then all of a sudden more connected to your cause, and not everyone kind of has that connection. One of the interesting statistics that we see, and actually I talk about quite a lot, is 85% of people who volunteer will donate to the charity that they volunteer with. And that is all because, of course, they are spending their time, they're seeing on the ground the impact of what's happening, they're really involved and embedded and feel connected to that cause that they're supporting. And therefore, that is the one they're likely to go and run a marathon for or donate some of their money for as well. Just circling back to the very start of this podcast, when you were talking about the difficulty of that volunteer experience when they're going through the onboarding process, I think that's a huge thing of being able to get volunteers through the funnel really as quickly and easily as possible and make it accessible to as many people as possible, which has an impact not just on the time that's being volunteered and the impact that that time is having, but also from a fundraising team point of view, tying the two together. Because ultimately, if you're giving applicants a really bad experience and kind of bouncing them out the door and dropping out of the process, there's a whole load of kind of potential future fundraisers and donors in that crowd as well that are going with them. So I think that's a really important point.
And we haven't been a fundraising organisation because we've relied on our commercial, you know, workplace training. But of course, with people not returning back to the office, that isn't required as much, you know. And so not that it's stopped, it hasn't stopped, but it's definitely reduced in terms of what we were predicting, you know, coming out of that. So that's been quite difficult. And I've applied for several different organisations volunteering wise just to see what the process is like.
Yeah.
And that's why I do refer to the professional volunteering for St John, because it is a bigger ask. And I don't think we're ever going to have a micro volunteering opportunity that is clinical or that will enable somebody to be so involved, say, at the London Marathon. We have fundraisers and the people that are making noise and, you know, cheering people on. That is a micro volunteering role.
Yeah.
So there's elements of it, but it's how we sell that and make it something that somebody does over and over and over and again. Marathon happens once a year. How do we get that person to do something else? And I think that's
to it. Yeah.
I think that's something that we need to get better at.
Yeah. And that's finding the consistency of things that they can do to help, even when there's not necessarily big events that are happening.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. And just to circle back, so you've mentioned the term a few times on professional volunteering, which I really like, and I've not really heard anyone else speak about it as much in that way. So to you, a professional volunteer, just to define it, it sounds as though it is someone that is essentially carrying out work that could be professional work. You know, they're people, yes, they're volunteering to do it, but this could be, you know, administering first aid or being there to be first aid support, first kind of line of defense for anyone that has a medical emergency. That is professional work, and that is what you'd see as a professional volunteer.
And it's because it's the level of training that you are required to do, and because of changes in the law, you know, coming out of Manchester inquiry, our new level of emergency responder, you're going to have to do at least 100 hours a year to be able to keep up your competence and confidence in skills, so that you don't have skills fade. You know, so you know.
How do you track that, Sally? Is that in the system? Have you got schedules?
Yes, it's in the system, and a little bit manual, but it's in the system.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we'll get to a proper system. And also from our paramedics, they have to do 240 hours. That includes some training elements.
Is that all with St John?
Yeah.
It's not like, I did 50 hours with the NHS and I did 20 hours with this.
No, it's all in St John.
And you're the ones that provide the accreditation and the training and the badges.
Yeah. And then you've got things, people like, you know, we've got people running event managing at the football, the first aid, you've got event managers at the marathon, you've got event controllers, obviously we covered the funeral, we covered the coronation.
Queen's funeral. Yeah.
Again, that was another call to action.
Yep. And they just spring out of nowhere, right? Queen's
come out
funeral.
of nowhere.
There's no pre-warning. It's dropped on you, and you've just got to respond to that event and just have a database of people, I guess, that you can call upon when that happens.
Yeah, we are very good in a crisis.
Yeah, so there's your tagline. Like it. Cool. Did you have any kind of closing thoughts for us, Sally? And one of the other things that we've been doing with some of the other podcast guests is to see if you had any other questions to ask the next guest that comes on the show.
I think that sometimes it's really nice to reflect on what you've done, actually.
Yeah.
and what drives you to continue doing that. And I am moving on from St John's, so it's around, what do I want to do next in terms of volunteering or charity, or do I want a change and do my volunteering as a volunteer? So it's having those reflections.
Got some thoughts around that already, or is that some time you're going to take to think about those next steps?
I think I'm just going to take some time and see what manifests. I'm a great believer in destiny, so whatever comes my way, but having conversations and talking to people is really interesting. And I think for all organisations, it's about making it really easy and remembering that there's that person at the end of the line, a person at the end of it that wants to give their time. And so to be really engaging with them from the outset and honest in terms of expectation. If it is a requirement that it is every week, to be really honest and open about it. And
it's not always a fit, is it? It's about making sure that you're aligned from the start, rather than trying to force something that's not going to work. It's much better for both if you both align with that.
And making easy language, removal of acronyms. Charities really love acronyms.
They do, yeah.
And acronyms are fine once you're sort of embedded. I think it's that start that people don't always understand. That can be different things as well. And also from a diversity perspective, to be really intent if we're around ensuring that you're opening up to all areas of our communities, and who aren't we engaging with, I think is really important. And to reflect the communities that you're in, that's really important from my perspective. So that's something that I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Just some closing thoughts from me. I think it's very evident that you've got some really unique experiences. I love how you've followed your passion and what feels like has been right to you at all stages in your career. And that's taken you on quite a twisted journey, from kind of cooking into kind of being hospitality, to following your kids and helping that sort of outdoorsy passion, to then volunteering through into being actually like a leader for one of the biggest, what is the biggest recruitment project probably in the UK healthcare space for probably the last few years. So really incredible. Thank you so much for taking some time to speak to us today. Would really be to follow your next step, Sally, and I'm sure whichever organisation or whichever path you choose to take, they'll be very lucky to have you and your experience on board. So thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us today, and we look forward to hearing from you again soon.
Lovely. Thank you, Sam, and thank you to all the listeners as well.
Thank you so much for listening to the Engage Volunteer podcast. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the world of volunteering. Until then, stay engaged and keep making a difference in your community.